The last rays of sunlight on the October afternoon filtered through the red maple trees, creating streaks of light dancing on the wet asphalt after the drizzle. Thomas Wilson stood motionless in front of the Boston Police Department building, feeling every drop of cold sweat running down his spine under his straight black vest. He clenched the file in his hand, his trembling fingers causing the pages to make a soft rustling sound in the still air of the late afternoon. Today is his first day as sheriff, a proud achievement for an African American like Thomas. But instead of joy, there was a heavy feeling in his heart. Just 3 months ago, on these very steps, he had an experience he could never forget. The sweet smell of coffee and donuts wafting from the roadside restaurant made Thomas remember that fateful morning even more clearly. He stopped by the restaurant to buy breakfast, still in simple casual clothes, a navy blue polo shirt and faded jeans, before going to the police station to complete the employment procedures. As he walked out of the bar, he bumped into a white police officer who was rushing in. "Sorry," Thomas said politely, and smiled. But the other person's reaction stunned him. The police officer, Thomas later learned his name was Michael Conway, looked at him with undisguised contempt. And before Thomas could react, Conway spat right in front of his feet. "Get out of the way, you nigger," Conway growled, loud enough for everyone around to hear. Thomas stood dumbfounded, a feeling of humiliation and anger welling up in his chest. But he restrained himself. During his 15 years in the police service in Chicago, he became accustomed to discriminatory looks and racist attitudes. But what hurt him most was not Conway's actions, but the silence of the witnesses. No one spoke up. No one expressed any objection. The sound of a patrol car's siren echoing in the distance brought Thomas back to reality. He took a deep breath, feeling the cool Boston air fill his lungs. The smell of damp maple leaves mixed with the smell of car exhaust and coffee creates a unique flavor of this city. The city where from today, he will be responsible for protecting security and order. Thomas entered the building, the sound of his leather shoes echoing on the polished marble floor. The curious and timid eyes of the staff followed his every step. Some people whispered, and others quickly bent down to work as he passed by. Thomas could feel the tense atmosphere in the space. This was not the welcome one would normally give a new police chief. In the main meeting room, the entire Boston Police Command was present. Thomas recognized Conway sitting in the front row, his face pale as he realized his new boss was the same black man he had insulted 3 months ago. Thomas put the file down on the table. The sound was gentle, but seemed to echo in the suffocatingly silent room. He looked around the room, scanning each face. Some people looked down. Some responded to his gaze with a challenge. And there were also curious eyes, waiting to see how the new police chief would handle this situation. "Good morning," Thomas said, his deep and confident voice echoing in the space. "I am Thomas Wilson, and as of today, I will assume the position of Chief of Police of the Boston Police Department." He paused for a moment, letting these words sink into each person present in the room. Conway still sat stiffly in his chair, sweat beading on his forehead. "I know many of you are wondering about this appointment decision. There may be some who disagree, some who doubt my leadership ability, and some—" Thomas's eyes stopped. There was another moment on Conway's face. Had his own preconceived notions about me. The room became even more silent. Heads bowed lower, and Conway seemed to disappear from his chair. But I'm not here to judge or punish anyone. I'm here with one mission: to make Boston a safer and fairer city for everyone, regardless of their background. Who, what color their skin, or what their background is. Thomas opened the file in front of him and took out a stack of papers. In my hand is a report on Boston's crime situation over the past 6 months. We have had remarkable successes, but there are still many challenges ahead. And to overcome these challenges, we need to do working together as a unified team. He stopped and looked straight at Conway. Officer Conway, after this meeting, I would like to see you in my office. Conway was startled. His face became even paler. The people around started whispering. They all knew about the incident 3 months ago. News travels fast in an organization like the police. Thomas continued the meeting, presenting his new plans and strategies. He talked about increased patrols in high-crime areas, about new training programs on cultural awareness and community communication skills, about changes in reporting and assessment processes. Work efficiency price. When the meeting ended, Conway slowly walked toward Thomas's office. Every step he took seemed to carry a ton of burden. Thomas was already sitting behind his desk, the afternoon sunlight streaming through the window, creating warm streaks of light on the dark wooden surface. "Sit down, Conway," Thomas said, not angry, but not friendly either. Conway sat down, looking at the floor. "Is there anything you want to tell me?" Thomas asked. Conway swallowed hard, his throat dry. I apologize for my actions, boss," he finally spoke. "I know what I did was wrong and unforgivable." Thomas was silent for a moment, observing the other person. In the afternoon sunlight, he could clearly see the beads of sweat glistening on Conway's forehead, his trembling fingers clasped together. "Conway, I'm not one to forgive easily," Thomas said, "but I believe that everyone deserves a chance to correct their mistakes." Conway raised his head, his eyes filled with surprise. "From tomorrow, you will be assigned to work at the community department. You will be in charge of the connection program between the police and social organizations in the area, especially communities of color." Conway turned pale. "But, boss, this is not a punishment, Conway," Thomas interrupted. "This is your chance to learn, to understand that the people you once despised are normal people like you, with their own dreams, fears, and aspirations." Thomas stood up and walked to the window. The sunset dyed the Boston sky red. High-rise buildings reflected light like giant mirrors. "I don't ask you to immediately change the prejudices that have been ingrained in your mind for many years. But I hope you can open your heart and learn to see people for who they really are, not by the color of their skin or their background." Conway stood up, his back a little straighter. "Yes, boss, I will do my best." "Good. You can go home now." As the office door closed behind Conway, Thomas sighed, feeling like a weight had been lifted. He knows this is just the first step in a long journey to change the thinking and culture of an entire organization. But at least he showed Conway, and thereby the police department, that hatred and prejudice are not the answer. Outside the window, the streetlights began to light up one by one, like stars falling from the darkening sky. Thomas looked down at the city, where millions of people live, work, and dream. He promised himself that he would do everything he could to make Boston a better place for everyone. A place where prejudice and discrimination. 2 months have passed since Thomas Wilson took office as Chief of Police of Boston. Winter has come, covering the city with a blanket of white snow. In his cozy office, Thomas is attentively reading monthly reports from his departments. In particular, he stopped longer at the report page of the community department, where Michael Conway was working. There was a knock on the door, and Sarah Martinez, Deputy Chief of Police, walked in with a new file. The faint smell of coffee from the cup in her hand mixed with the scent of pine wood from the Christmas tree placed in the corner of the room. "You should see this." Sarah placed the file on Thomas's desk. "This is feedback from the community about the community room's new program." Thomas put down his pen and reached for the file. His eyes fell on an emotional letter from Mrs. Gloria Washington, president of the African American Association of Boston. "Conway has done amazing things," Sarah commented, sitting in the chair across from Thomas. "At first, everyone was skeptical when you transferred him to the community room. But now—" Thomas nodded, remembering those first days. Conway was awkward and uncomfortable in her new role, facing suspicious and even hostile eyes from the community. But gradually, things began to change. The pivotal point happened a month ago, in what seemed like a disastrous event. Conway was assigned to coordinate a children's reading program at a public library in a black neighborhood. On the first day, only 3 children attended, accompanied by mothers who looked at Conway with shy eyes. But instead of giving up, Conway did the unexpected. He began talking about his childhood, about his alcoholic and violent father, about the nights he spent hiding in the closet to avoid his father's anger. He talked about how books became his only safe haven and about his dream of becoming a police officer to protect other children from going through what he went through. "We all have our own wounds," Conway told the children and parents that day. "But it's those wounds that make us who we are today." Conway's story spread quickly in the community. The following week, the number of children attending increased to 15. Next week, it will be 30. And now, the reading program has become one of the most popular activities at the library. "I think it's time to meet Conway," Thomas said, setting the file down on the table. "Get him up here for me." 10 minutes later, Conway walked into the office. Unlike the scared look he had 2 months ago, he now walks with a more confident gait, although still maintaining a respectful attitude. "Sit down, Conway." Thomas gestured toward the empty chair. "I just read the report about your work at the community department." Conway sat down, his hands neatly placed on his knees. "I hope I don't disappoint you, boss." Thomas smiled, for the first time since they met. "On the contrary, he has done things that not many people believed possible." Conway was silent for a moment, as if thinking about something. "Boss," he finally said, "I owe you an apology. Not a formal apology like last time, but a real apology from the bottom of my heart." Thomas looked at the person opposite, saying nothing. "The past 2 months have been life-changing for me," Conway continued. "I met amazing people, people I didn't even look at before because of the color of their skin. I heard stories about their lives, about the difficulties they faced, about their dreams and hopes." Conway stopped and took a deep breath. "And I realized that we are not as different as I thought. We all have pain, fears, desires. We are all human." Outside the window, snow began to fall lightly, white snowflakes spinning in the cold Boston air. Thomas stood up and walked to the window. "Conway, you know," Thomas said, still looking out. "When I decided to transfer you to the community department, many people thought I was crazy. They said I was putting an important program in the hands of a racist." Conway bowed his head, the memories of his actions still embarrassing him. "But I believe that people have the ability to change, if they are given the chance." Thomas looked back at Conway. "And you proved it." "Thank you, boss," Conway said quietly, "for giving me that chance." "No, Conway. Thank you for taking that chance and doing the right thing." Thomas returned to his desk and took out another file. I have a proposal for you. We are planning to expand the community department's program to other areas of the city. I would like you to be in charge of this project as head of the community department. Conway was so surprised that he was speechless. But, boss, You are the best person for this position, Conway. You have gone through the journey from prejudice to understanding. You know how to connect with people, how to listen and share. That's exactly what we do. I need it. Conway stood up, his back straight. I won't disappoint you, boss. I know, Thomas smiled. Now, go home. We have a lot to do tomorrow. After Conway left, Thomas stood by the window, watching the policeman's figure slowly disappear into the snow. He thinks about their journey, from a moment filled with tension and hostility to a relationship of mutual respect and understanding. Sarah entered the office again. Are you sure about this decision? Sure, Thomas replied. Sometimes the best way to fight prejudice is to show people how wrong they are. Sarah nodded. You know, since you got here, things have changed a lot. Not just Conway, but the whole police department. People are starting to see things differently. Change always takes time, Thomas said. But it's important that we start somewhere. Outside, snow was still falling, covering the city with a layer of pure white. In the warm yellow streetlights, snowflakes are like small stars falling from the night sky, bringing hope for a better future. A world where people look at each other with their hearts instead of prejudices. Thomas thought about what had happened in the past 2 months, about how one act of forgiveness can change a person's life, about how shared stories can build bridges between hearts, and about how human love, when given the chance, can overcome all barriers of prejudice and hatred. He knows the road ahead is still long. Prejudice doesn't disappear overnight, and change isn't always easy. But every small step, every story told, every heart touched is part of the journey towards a better world. And for Thomas Wilson, it was everything he could have wished for. The sound of ambulance sirens pierced the quiet atmosphere of the Boston night. Thomas Wilson stood motionless in front of the crime scene, his heart beating loudly in his chest. The smell of gunpowder still lingered in the cold February air, mixed with the strong smell of blood and the smell of wet asphalt after the drizzle. Michael Conway lay on an ambulance stretcher, blood soaking the white bandage on his chest. The red and blue lights from the ambulance swept across his pale face, casting eerie shadows on his pale skin. I have to stop him, Conway whispered as Thomas crouched beside him. He was going to shoot the baby. Thomas held Conway's hand tightly, feeling the warmth fading in his trembling fingers. You did great, Conway. Just rest. 6 hours earlier, Conway was coordinating a community meeting at the Roxbury Cultural Center. It was an important event where police and locals discussed measures to enhance security in the area. No one expected that the meeting would end in tragedy. James Miller, a former prisoner who had just completed his sentence, broke into the center with a gun. He was in a drug stupor and was looking for his son, an 8-year-old boy who was attending the meeting with his mother. Miller believed that his ex-wife was hiding their son from him, and he decided to take the child back by force. Conway was the first to realize the dangerous situation. He tried to negotiate with Miller, using the communication skills he learned over the past months at the community room. James, can we talk? Conway slowly walked toward Miller, his hands raised in a gesture of goodwill. I understand you're in a lot of pain. You don't understand anything, Miller roared, his hand shaking as he pointed his gun at the crowd. They stole my son. I have the right to see my son. In the panicked crowd, little Tommy, Miller's son, burst into tears. The crying attracted Miller's attention, and he turned his gun toward it. Without a moment's hesitation, Conway rushed toward Miller as soon as he pulled the trigger. Gunfire rang out in the closed space of the hall, and Conway fell, blood beginning to stain his white shirt. Other officers quickly restrained Miller, but the damage had already been done. Conway was hit right in the chest. The bullet grazed his heart just a few millimeters. Now, in the ambulance roaring through the streets of Boston, Thomas couldn't help but think about the irony of fate. The man who once spat at him because of the color of his skin was now lying here, bleeding because he had saved a black child. "Boss," Conway whispered, his voice weak, "if I don't make it—" "Silence," Thomas interrupted. "You'll be fine. We have a lot of work to do." Conway smiled weakly. "I never thought I would do this. Save a black child." "You saved a child, Conway. That's all. An innocent child." Tears rolled down Conway's cheeks. "I was wrong, wasn't I, boss? All those years, I was wrong about everything." Thomas squeezed Conway's hand. "The important thing is that you understand now, and you have changed. That's the most important thing." At the hospital, doctors worked for 4 hours to save Conway's life. Thomas sat in the waiting room, his mind racing with thoughts. He remembered the moment he first met Conway, remembering the anger and humiliation he felt at being insulted. And now, he was praying for that person's survival. Sarah Martinez walked in, carrying 2 cups of hot coffee. "The news has spread throughout the city," she said, as she handed a cup to Thomas. "Everyone's talking about Conway, about how he saved the boy." Thomas took a sip of bitter coffee, feeling the heat spreading through his tired body. "He's changed a lot, Sarah. Not just his actions today, but everything he's done in these past months." "You were right about him," Sarah nodded. "When you decided to give him a chance at the community room, I thought you were crazy. But you saw something in him that we didn't see." "I see the possibility of change," Thomas said quietly. "That's the best thing about humans. We can always change, if we really want to." The doctor walked out with a tired but relieved expression. "Mr. Conway will be fine," he said. "The bullet grazed his heart by just a few millimeters, but we handled the situation. He needs to rest for a while, but will make a full recovery." Thomas breathed a sigh of relief. "Can we visit him?" "Okay, but just for a while. He needs to rest." In the hospital room, Conway lay weak on the bed, tubes and monitoring wires wrapped around his body. But when he saw Thomas, he tried to smile. "Boss!" "I told you it would be fine." Thomas pulled the chair down next to him. "You did a very brave thing today, Conway." "I just did the right thing," Conway said quietly. "Like what you taught me." Thomas shook his head. "No, Conway. That's something you've learned about yourself. I'm just giving you a chance to look at things differently." Conway was silent for a moment, as if thinking about something. "Boss," he said finally, "I want to tell you about my father." Thomas sat quietly listening as Conway told of his alcoholic and violent father, of the nights spent hiding in the closet, of how he always blamed others for his failures. "He hates everyone," Conway said, his voice shaking, "especially people of different skin colors. And I grew up with those hateful words. I thought that was the only way to see the world. But now you know there are other ways," Thomas said softly. "Yes," Conway nodded. "And I want to do more. I want to help other people see that too, that we don't have to live in hate. Thomas looked out the hospital window, where dawn was slowly rising over the city of Boston. A new day is beginning, bringing with it new hopes. You'll get your chance, Conway. But first, rest and recover. As Thomas left the hospital, he received a text message from Gloria Washington, president of the African American Association. She wanted to hold a ceremony to honor Conway when he was discharged from the hospital. "We want to show the community that change is real," she wrote, "that human love can overcome all barriers of prejudice and hatred." Thomas smiled as he read the message. He thought about Conway's journey, from a prejudiced police officer to someone willing to sacrifice his life to save a black child. It is not only a story about an individual's change, but also about hope for a better society. In the early morning sunlight, Thomas drove home filled with thoughts. He knew that Conway's story would become a symbol, a testament to the human ability to change. And perhaps that is exactly what Boston and America needs. Stories of hope, of forgiveness, and of the ability to overcome prejudice to see the humanity in every person. 1 year after the events at the Roxbury Cultural Center, Thomas Wilson stood before a crowd in Faneuil Hall, one of Boston's most historic venues. The afternoon sunlight shines through the ancient stained glass windows, creating colorful streaks of light on the polished wooden floor. The smell of pine wood from the rows of old chairs mixed with the scent of fresh flowers decorating the ceremony, creating a solemn but cozy atmosphere. Today marks the first anniversary of Thomas's inauguration as Boston Police Chief, and also the first graduation ceremony of the Community Policing Training Program, a new initiative launched by Michael Conway after recovering from his injuries. Love. When I came to Boston a year ago, Thomas began his speech, his deep voice echoing in the vast space. I brought with me a simple dream: to build a police force that truly serves and protect everyone, regardless of skin color, religion, or background. In the crowd, Conway sat in the front row, flanked by Tommy Miller, the boy whose life he had saved a year earlier, and his mother. The scar on Conway's chest remains, a constant reminder of the fateful moment that changed his life. But it wasn't because of me alone that dream came true, Thomas continued. It's thanks to the courageous people who dared to face their own prejudices and decided to change. He looked straight at Conway, and the whole hall turned in that direction. Conway bowed humbly, but Thomas could see the pride in his eyes. Today, we not only celebrate a year of change, we also welcome the first 50 officers to graduate from the Community Policing Training Program, a program designed to remove barriers between police and people, to build mutual trust and understanding. The graduates sat in a block in neat uniforms. They come from all walks of life: white, black, male, female, young, old. But all share one thing in common: the determination to become true defenders of justice. This show was born from an extraordinary story, Thomas continued, a story of change, of courage, and of the power of forgiveness. Michael Conway, please come up here. Conway slowly stood up and walked onto the stage to resounding applause. When he stood next to Thomas, no one could have imagined that a year ago, these two people had stood at opposite ends of the abyss of prejudice and hatred. Michael is more than just the founder of this program, Thomas said. He is also a living testament to what we want to teach, that no one is born with prejudice and hatred. These are things that are learned and nurtured, and if they can be learned, they can also be removed. Conway walked up to the microphone, slightly shakily adjusting it. "A year ago," he began, his voice hoarse with emotion, "I was a different person, someone who lived in the darkness of prejudice and hatred, someone who thought that skin color determined one's worth. People." He stopped, took a deep breath. "But then I was given a chance to see the world through different eyes, to learn to listen to stories different from my own, to understand that people's pain and dreams are not independent of each other, depending on their skin color." Tommy Miller, the boy whose life Conway had saved, suddenly stood up and ran onto the stage. The boy hugged Conway, and the whole hall suddenly fell silent at this emotional moment. "Tommy is the reason I'm standing here today," Conway continued, one arm around the boy's shoulder. "Not because I saved him, but because he saved me. In the moment of facing death, I did not see a child of color. I only saw an innocent child in need of protection, and that was the moment I truly understood that all my prejudices were meaningless." The applause rang out like thunder, and many people in the hall could not hide their tears. Thomas stood behind, filled with pride and emotion. "This training program," Conway continued as the applause subsided, "is built on the belief that every police officer is not only a law enforcement officer, but also a bridge between communities. We teach his students not only about the law and process, but also about the history, about the culture, about the pains and dreams of the different communities in this city." He turned to the graduates. "You are more than just police officers. You are bridge builders, healers, bringers of hope. Remember that behind every face you see on the street, there is a story. One life, one beating heart." When the ceremony ended, everyone gathered in the lobby to congratulate the new police officers. Thomas stood in a corner, observing the scene in front of him. Conway was chatting happily with a group of colored people. Tommy still clung to his hand and wouldn't let go. Graduates hugged their loved ones with joy. And everywhere, people talk, laugh, share their stories without any barriers of skin color or background. Sarah Martinez walked up to Thomas, holding 2 glasses of wine. "A memorable year, right?" she said, as she handed a glass to Thomas. "That's right," Thomas nodded. "But there's still a lot of work to be done." "At least we've started," Sarah smiled. "And that's the most important thing." Thomas took a sip of wine, letting the sweet taste spread in his mouth. He thought about his first day in Boston, about the moment Conway spat in front of him, about the risky decision to turn the community room over to Conway, about that fateful night at the Roxbury Cultural Center, and about all the changes have occurred over the past year. "You know," Conway suddenly appeared next to him, Tommy still holding his hand tightly. "I often wonder why you didn't fire me immediately that day." Thomas smiled. "Because I see something in your eyes, Conway. A glimmer of common sense, obscured by prejudice and fear. I believe that if given the chance, that light will shine." "And you were right," Conway nodded. "Thank you, boss, for trusting me." "No, Conway, thank you for proving that my trust was worth it." Tommy looked up at the 2 men with curious eyes. "Mr. Conway," the boy said, "I want to be a police officer like you." Conway knelt down to the boy's level. "Is that so? Why, Tommy?" "Because I want to help people," Tommy said simply, "like you helped me." Thomas looked at the scene before him and was filled with hope. In Tommy's innocent eyes, he sees a future where prejudice and hatred no longer have a place, where people look at each other by heart instead of skin color, where stories like Conway's do not exist, was the exception, but became the norm. Outside the window, sunset gradually fell over the city of Boston. The last rays of the day shine through the stained glass windows, creating brilliant streaks of light on the floor. Thomas thought about the old saying, "The darkness is thickest before dawn." Perhaps that is exactly what is happening. After long years of prejudice and division, the light of hope and understanding is finally dawning. And here, in this hall of history, among people who have learned to overcome the barriers of prejudice, to find the humanity in each other, Thomas Wilson knows that his dream of a just and compassionate world is fulfilled, is no longer a distant dream. It is gradually becoming a reality, day by day, moment by moment, through stories like Conway's, through clear eyes like Tommy's, and through the human love that is lit in every heart.